Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I hope you and your families are safe during these challenging times. Secondly, thank you for joining us for episode 2 of the GRC Virtual Supper Club. The topic is, will companies start to embrace the Zoom work culture, and how will this impact their risk environments? As many of you may know, the Supper Club is a global peer group network and not a sales event, with emphasis on sharing, learning, and ultimately having fun, bringing fun to governance, risk, and control. This is the second of the virtual trilogy, so I thought I'd dress up a little bit, as it's the first time I've worn a suit in about 3 months. And hopefully all of you are at home in dress down. We do our best to keep these bite-sized, and in order to help that, I have created a COVID scale, or the Boris barometer, which should help me maintain the flow of the speakers as we go through the discussions. You're also able to interact this evening using the chat function. So if you're able to ping any questions you have over, I will put these to our speakers. I can also video you in if your functionality is enabled, and you can put the questions to them yourselves. The 3 speakers for this evening are, firstly, Stelios Valtzis from SaarGummi Group, who's their global CISO. We have Phillips, who is an ex-police officer, Met police officer and MI5, and also runs his own security business now. We also have Freidlin, who's the Director of Ethics and Compliance for SAI Global. And we also have a special guest star on the panel, which is Mr. Barr, who is representing the Institute of Operational Risk. I'd like to thank our sponsors, SAI Global and Bowman Group, for supporting us through this trilogy. And we also have an illustrator somewhere left or right of me who will be capturing the evening on illustration. For those of you that saw the first illustration from episode 1, he is a fantastic illustrator, and I look forward to seeing what he does this evening. So I hope you have your microwave meals and your drinks ready, be them alcoholic or non-alcoholic, as I am just about to introduce our first speaker for this evening. Our first speaker for this evening is a global CISO for SaarGummi Group, which is headquartered in Luxemburg. He has a BEng in electronics engineering, is a blockchain technology tutor with extensive international experience in telecommunications, automotive, shipping, and manufacturing. He's presented at national and international conferences and is a member of local and central government committees within his home country of Greece. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Stelios Valtzis.
So I remember in February this year, when it was becoming more and more evident that COVID-19 is going to become something, well, let's say more trendy in the news than the royal family, we had emergency meetings and discussions about how we could prepare our organization to move to a long-term home office mode of operation. And for many organizations, the first instinct was to ask, do we have enough capacity on our VPN gateways? Is ERP performance going to be acceptable? And the shocking discovery that probably there would be no production at all has led all of us thinking a bit more complicated and performing risk analysis and drafting what-if scenarios like, so what will happen if an employee is on quarantine and accidentally spills their coffee on the keyboard? What if we need to quarantine a complete site or multiple sites where we actually store critical IT spares? Yeah. Now, sometimes the DNA of decision makers focuses them to ensure that they still have bits and bytes flowing around. They have a tendency to be happy when users can access cloud-based solutions, especially because performance and updates become the problem of the cloud operator, and because we all tend to believe that organizations like Zoom invest a lot of money on cybersecurity, so they glam in the eyes of decision makers as security heavens. Not always the case. Many organizations also have been just very happy to agree deploying any sorts of software and take advantage of the COVID-19 free offers, like free collaboration or free telephony licenses. I think we all know about them, more or less. However, in the IT and information security community, there is one thing that we know very well, and that is that there is no free lunch out there, even if the payout is going to be done for somebody else. So we must never accept such decisions so easily. We must always consider the impact of software to the business processes and to information security. In several organizations, the average workforce does not even know what VPN is. They are all used to go to work, do what they have to do, return home, and don't even consider reading emails from their mobile phones, let alone the possibility to connect remotely and do some extra work. So the nomadic workforce concept is just not there. People still today are used to work in meeting rooms with physical contact, discussions, pen and paper, shut down in the afternoon, go home. So if we rewind the tape of COVID-19 back to February and March, and we play again the scenario, we are in a situation where we have to introduce the workforce to two new technologies at the same time. Situation has called us into the need to make global organizational changes in a rather fast and probably unstructured way. And so what better situation for a bad guy to attack? So we probably all of us remember back then that hacking groups have announced a moratorium on health organizations, but the rest of us, we had to protect our information from ransomware and other malware that could be injected by social engineering and phishing attacks. In April, Google reported that they captured in one single week about 18 million phishing emails just in 1 week. And it's about the time when EasyJet has been hacked and 9 million customers' personal data has leaked. Now, of course, there is confidentiality and secrecy regarding EasyJet's hacking. And nobody knows what really happened unless you are the CISO of EasyJet. But I think that one cannot avoid speculating that this incident could be related with a phishing attack at that time. So, lessons learned, the bad guy is always happy during the turmoil. Now, it becomes more and more evident that organizations will support collaboration, or what Lee has baptized, has called it as Zoom culture, and has made this the title of today's webinar. In the telecommunication industry, where I have spent most of my career, home office has been considered to be more of like a default setting. So it is one extreme situation, and telecom industry is very well organized to manage the risks from home office. However, there is another extreme situation, which is the small and medium enterprise, is the production facility, is the back office support function, where people are used to work on a desk and never from home. And there are risks that are too high, and we have to understand that quite well, that we cannot introduce properly new technologies in a way that COVID-19 has dictated us. So what can a CISO actually do? I tend to parallel the CISO to a tightrope walker. Got it. So I tend to parallel the CISO role to a tightrope walker. And we need to balance between the continuously evolving cybersecurity threats, the obvious lack of resources, and at the same time look forward and prepare our organizations in advance for what might come. What matters most, in my opinion, is that we have to accept the fact that at least once a major security incident will happen in any organization, and it will probably cost money. The risk is there, and Zoom culture is just going to increase the risk likelihood. Now, you can control only to a certain extent the likelihood of the risk, but you can definitely control the impact of it. So one could ask, what may be the risks of the Zoom culture? And for that, one should assess where is the value in the business process that is called collaboration. Typically, hackers will target certain business processes from where they can extract profit. And remember, unless we're talking about industrial espionage, an attacker typically is looking for high reward and quick earnings. So they will target emails, documents, and other kinds of content to inject malware and spread ransomware. They will target records that can be sold to the dark web quickly, such as credit card numbers, medical records, social security numbers, and they will target to understand your current business context in order to orchestrate their social engineering attack. And to gain access to this information, they only need one password. So they will try to trick the workforce into handing over the password via phishing attack. They also need one weak link, of course, in the chain of the business process to trick. Now, the links in the chain become weaker by home office, and there are many reasons for that. For one, employees may have children or other family members that at home that they have to attend. They might be worried about their health, the health of their parents, of their grandparents, or their security of their income. And if they are confined to their home, they might feel restless or frustrated. The boundary between work and home life blurs for people who work in the same place where they sleep. So they may feel pressure to be online when they are typically supposed to be offline. So the end result is that remote workers will lose concentration and eventually they will fall for a phishing attack. So rule number one, reassess business processes and ensure there is an IT system for every critical task. For example, do not let payments happen without approvals on systems. Then there is rule number two. All your data becomes accessible via every possible means when you use a cloud-based collaboration environment. So build wisely your policies, enforce information classification, and if possible, automate it. And that will help users feel the sensitivity of what they are exchanging in open channels. Of course, you have also to control your communication channels by investing in data loss prevention technologies. Today, there are many solutions that block emails and all other types of outgoing communication, and that may contain confidential information to be sent to unauthorized audiences. Rule number three, where possible, make sure that your employees understand the meaning of confidentiality. What is confidential must remain confidential and is confidential as long as the distribution list is maintained. So the most sensitive information, like product roadmaps, intellectual property, patents, manufacturing processes, are the ones that hold value. And therefore, we have to invest in information classification by also classifying the meeting rooms, the chat rooms, and in general, regulate how collaboration platforms should be used. A typical concern is when partners are forced to work from home because they might work for competitors. So collaboration tools in such cases is an issue because the partner working for a competitor will have access to confidential information. And of course, we can all agree that such cases are always tricky and you can never have full confidentiality. But there is a reason why certain multinational companies have decided to request employees to declare conflicts of interest on a voluntary basis. And in those cases, home office benefits have been examined more thoroughly. So I still have 5 minutes, but I think I will stop here. I will thank you for your attention. And all I have to do, just as a last note, is to encourage you to pay attention to all standard security measures, such as avoiding public Wi-Fi, use unknown USB thumb drives, and all the rest. They are there. There is a reason. If you combine all those measures with rules that we have just explained, I think that it should be fairly more secure to let the Zoom culture grow inside any organization.
Fantastic. And actually, I was going to interrupt you a few seconds ago. You've got a poll that you wanted to run. So I'm going to click that now. Hopefully, most of you will be able to see this. We had a few people last time that were maybe on their phone and they probably couldn't see the poll, but I'm just going to launch it now. It should be on your screens. Do you feel confident your current data loss prevention measures suffice when workforce works from home? If you can click one of those 4 options, that would be great. And while you're doing that, I'll just thank Stelios. Well, we've got a few questions coming in for you that I will do my best to ask now, or make the individual live on camera.
Sure.
So we've got one from Mark Leopold actually. So I'm just waiting for a few more people to answer the poll. We've got about 50%. I'll give it a few more seconds, and I'll just close it. We're up to 60 now. There's a few more of you clicking, and countdown's gone. Right, so poll's closed. And can you see the results there, Stelios, in terms of the spread of those results? You got 45% are saying no, we will never be able to have a perfect. And then 36 said yes, we are regularly performing. So does that surprise you?
Well, not really, but if I may say, there is a message for the people who say that they will never have the perfect measure. Let's call it that way. Yes, of course, they will never have. But as I said, our job is to basically walk on a tightrope. Okay, so yes, nothing is perfect for sure, but at the same time, we have to balance between the resources that we have, which are limited, especially these days because of the COVID lockdown, okay? And we have to understand where it makes the most impact to invest those resources. And that's why regular risk analysis is required and is the way that will help you understand where you should focus your investments, what needs to be done. And believe me, there are many things that can be done which actually don't really cost. Okay, and you can increase your security posture by taking small measures which may not have such a high cost, but which will really make sense. Just imagine the very simple one. Make sure that nobody from the workforce has local administrator account privileges. It's very easy. It's nothing, but it is what might save you from ransomware. Okay, so yes, there is nothing that's perfect, but a web of measures which is properly designed by a risk analysis and an impact and business impact analysis, I think is what will keep any organization safe, or at least be able to recover quickly after a security incident, and not be the ones that will file for Chapter 11 because the cost of recovery is extremely high.
Perfect. We've actually got another question actually coming in from Mark Leopold, actually. I have him set up to see if his cam will come on, and he can ask it live. So let's see if it works. I sent the request, Mark, so if you can accept that, you should pop up. We'll give him a couple of seconds to see if it works. As you can see, this isn't a well-oiled machine when it comes to me managing this panel down here, but you should have a request now, Mark. So but I'll ask it now as he's not joined. In most hacking cases, the penetration at time 0 typically results in the exploitation 2 to 6 months later. Hence, the real vulnerability will become apparent in Q3 and 4 of 2020 and later. What can be done now to be on top of that?
Very good question. So that relates to an incident life cycle, basically. So what you can do now is basically, first of all, prepare to make sure that you will be able to properly audit the incident. So make sure that you have good log files, okay, so that you will be able to understand what has happened, not react and try to see just to discover that maybe your log files are not working well. Then it's too late, and you will have no traces. Point number 2, make sure that you have ways to contain the incident the moment that it appears. Okay, and that means that you have to run some sort of analysis with what-if scenarios, okay, and see where you lack security measures. Let me give you examples. In my career, I have seen cases where there have been switches and routers that had configured VLAN segmentation, but for whatever reason, there was no port associated to that. So actually no VLAN segmentation. Okay, and then that means that the ransomware can spread anywhere.
Thank you very much. We've actually managed to get, I don't know where he is on everyone else's screen, but he's here. So let's do a virtual handshake. But we got Martin on, who's got a question to ask you as well. So Martin, sure. I'll turn on your microphone 1 second. This is me that's muted it. So can you hear us, Martin?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Martin. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. I'm just really want to follow up on the. Sorry, my webcam's in a funny place. On the zero-day question, is obviously a lot of organizations have increased their perimeter security around zero-day with technologies like Palo Alto, FireEye, etc., to prevent that zero-day and put things into honeypots. I was trying to look around, and I don't see that technology being in the consumer market space for people to be able to put on their home networks. Does that then present a risk? Obviously, businesses at the moment are, because of the impact of coronavirus, are people having to work from home. Do you think they may, because of those risks of those zero-day attacks, actually retreat and bring people back into the office until that technology is out there in the consumer marketplace for protection?
What a lovely question, I must say. And it is also one of the things that we were considering in my company, where we were analyzing the risks from bring your own device concept.
Yes.
And yeah, well, basically my personal view is that you should not bring your own device. Although it might sound like old times or whatever, I prefer to be a little bit more safe for exactly the reason that you have just described. Okay.
Yeah. So your home router is a bring your own device, isn't it? Because you've chosen your ISP, whether that be, in my case, GigaClear or.
Yeah. I wouldn't be in favor of something like that. Of course, it's not always possible, and that is why there is also another very clear rule that we try to have and we try to enforce, but it's not always easy to enforce, which is use company equipment for company data. Okay, so we don't want people to be able to use their personal computers for whatever reason. So maybe, for example, even just to access their email, or even to download, which is something which is very common in some companies, to download VPN connection profiles and use them to connect their personal desktop to the corporate network. That is a major no. So again, for all those reasons, definitely, yes, we are in favor of do not bring your own device. Hopefully one day we will be able to have some cost-effective way to manage zero-day attacks in the corporate environment. Sorry, in the commercial environment.
I'm going to have to stop you there. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for that question. We've had some breaking news. You can see the ticker tape, the expensive ticker tape down the bottom there. But we've just got one more question from Fayez. Okay, so his question is, remote working can result in behavior changes as people try to carry on working, but face problems, such as not being able to print. So how would you manage the risk of people changing data classification levels so they bypass the DLP or email material to their personal email addresses? I know we spoke in depth about IP is something that's big for you guys, and accessing that and those conflicts maybe of accessing that remotely. So is there any response to Fayez's question?
Okay, so I have to admit that I have not experienced a change in classification outside of the norm. So like, for example, that we review classification on regular times. And I have not, to be honest, I have not been called to manage such a possibility. So what I can only say is that typically you should only let an administrator touch automatic rules for classification of documents. Now, if the automatic rule doesn't work well and you have to manually change the classification, it is of course always the best idea to let the information owner do that and not anybody arbitrarily. Okay, or at least have a way that the information owner will confirm the downgrade of the classification or the upgrade of the classification. I'm not sure whether there is a solution out there right now that could actually facilitate that. So basically it should be part of manual check at the responsibility of the information owner. So regularly review and make sure that the proper classification is applied.
Perfect. I'll act as Fayez there. That's a great answer. That's exactly what I was looking for. So thank you for that. So we're bang on time, which is brilliant. Obviously, the COVID scale and the Boris barometer did its job. Our second speaker for this evening is Chris Phillips. He is the CEO of the International Protect and Prepare Security Office, also known as IPPSO. He has 39 years experience in policing across the Met and MI5 and is currently advising clients, corporate, government and private globally on counter-terrorism. He's also helped deliver the UK counter-terrorism crowded places strategy. There's not many crowded places at this minute in time. And also he is a fellow of the Security Institute and Chartered Institute of Risk and Security Management. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Chris Phillips.
Hi, good evening. Thanks very much, Lee. Yes, well, funny enough, the crowded places. Where's the only crowded places you get these days? Is actually in the hospitals, and hospitals are crowded. I can vouch for that. I was in one last week. But not only are hospitals crowded places, but also they are locations where things like these viruses are tested. They are places that have got pathogens and toxins and also radioactive sources. So actually, hospitals have suddenly become the focus of our worries, the government's worries, the police worries. Once again, and I think whilst I'm a terrorism expert, if you like, but actually this whole issue has brought up a huge panoply. Is that the right word? Panoply of issues around crisis management. And just to give you the example, I did some crisis management talks, and we did some exercises with a particular theatre a couple of years ago, and that theatre, the attitude generally was that there's nothing that could faze them because they could go and play elsewhere. They could really move with the times. Whatever happened, they felt that they didn't really need a great deal of crisis management expertise. Unfortunately, I read in the newspaper a couple of days ago that they're going bust because they hadn't given thought to the fact that they lose their audience. And I think Lee's got a question for you as well, a poll for this. It would be interesting to know how many people actually had a crisis management plan and how many people actually used that crisis management plan, and did it work? Did your crisis management plan work for this current problem that we've got? Be really interested, and whether now you're going to amend that crisis management plan as a result of this this pandemic. But that's just one of the issues I wanted to talk very quickly about. The issue for me, following on very much from Stelios's presentation, is about how this is going to impact the future and what is the new normal. What is the new normal that we're going to face for the next 10, 15 years as a result of this pandemic? Things are being sped up, and whether it's shopping online or whether it's working from home, these things are changing the way we operate. And the one thing, as Stelios quite rightly mentioned, the one thing that criminals want is confusion. They live and breed on confusion. And what we've got now is a load of people that probably have never used a computer before, suddenly having to use it, and suddenly having to face all these phishing attacks that we're seeing and potential social engineering issues as well. That's a really interesting point. Did your plan work? Yes, that's great. But 42% of people here say that they didn't. And I would suggest across the country, I mean, we're talking about people who've got an interest in this subject, I think, here today. I think you will find that across the country, the vast majority of business continuity plans did not even consider this potential problem. So, and including actually the government. And I know that pandemic was at the very top because I was working in the Home Office at the time. We were doing all these the bits of work on what is the threats and the terrorism threats, and pandemic was right up there. But it's clear that the government didn't do enough to prepare for it. So we have to face crisis management needs to be there. But what I really want to start with today is the lone worker. This, I believe, is going to be the new normal. Many people now have got used to working from home. It's a standard thing. They found that they can do it. They understand that actually I can work 2, 3, 4 days from home, and I don't need to travel into the office. I don't want to go on the tube network. I don't want to go on the buses. So people are going to want to do this. They're going to choose to do this. And as Stelios has already said, there are huge issues with this. And I don't think many companies have actually thought these through. Now, Stelios covered a lot of the issues around using computers, but I will go over a couple of those again. But let's take this back to the first instance. When does a business's responsibility start and end if you are now employing people who are lone workers? Is it the moment they get out of bed? Is it the moment they leave the house to go and sit in a cafe to do their work? Is it none of those things? And how much responsibility and duty of care has a company got for someone who is now working in their living room? And I think these issues are ones that need to be considered very quickly, actually, by companies who are already asking their people to do this. And if you just think through some of the potential scenarios, as an example, if you're in an office, someone has an illness, a heart attack, there's going to be generally someone there to look after them and see that they're okay. But what happens if they're working from home? and they don't get the necessary first aid. What happens, but they're still working for the company? What happens, as an example, maybe if you're asking people to go and work in cafes and hotels, where they might be able to go and use the Wi-Fi, and this has already been mentioned very quickly by Stelios, but actually the dangers that you've got from people actually logging on to Wi-Fi systems, which are then interfered with. And one of the things that I've always thought is a good idea is to think of yourself as an attacker. When I joined the police, and 30 odd years ago, I was told, if you think like a burglar, if you think of what they would do, then you've got a good chance of catching them. And for that reason, I've done quite a lot of work with individuals who have actually committed crime. And then you find out what their thinking is in order to think to work out ways of stopping that. And one of the guys I actually saw in a hotel and in a conference centre hotel, and he was able to turn off all the Wi-Fi and then log into everyone's computer. Everyone switched back into the Wi-Fi, and he had control of all their sets. So, have you actually told your staff how to deal with that? Have they got the VPN that protects them, or is it something that perhaps you'll only find out when someone's gone and done it, and you've got the issues to face? One of the other things I think that needs to be thought of is this insider threat piece. Your company, your secrets, the things that you value the most, you are now allowing to be looked at from home addresses, from people's cafes and hotels, where they're going to be operating their computer. Well, let me tell you that the incidence of listening devices being used on people's telephones, on actually being planted into offices, are extremely high. You wouldn't quite believe actually how many. I work with a company that goes and checks for these things, and just how many they actually find when they're going about their business, whether it's in a flower pot or whether it's an adapter for in a plug, which is actually there specifically to listen to what's being said. They found them in big banks in the City of London. They found them in companies with a lot of important information, which has, you don't know, probably been leaked to criminals. So these sort of things are happening. And Stelios mentioned the number of phishing attacks. I hadn't heard that figure, but what I do know that there are just so many now people jumping on the so many criminals jumping on the bandwagon to try to persuade people that perhaps didn't use the computer or their phone a great deal beforehand to link onto a subject, therefore creating a huge threat vector which actually could be coming to your business very soon. Now, the whole insider threat piece is also something that really needs to be given more thought. We do know that your weakest point really is your people. It doesn't really matter how good your physical security measures are. It doesn't matter how good your cyber security measures are if the person that you're employing is actually the one that's giving the secrets away deliberately. And that's where we face a new rub, because now we've got these people who probably beforehand were having a face-to-face with members in their company would perhaps be a little bit more inclined to not do something wrong because they think they were going to get caught. Now, in the safety of their own home, are fairly easy meat sometimes for criminals who want to get information from them. So the whole insider threat piece, the amount of information people are allowed to look at on their computers or get access to, needs to be considered differently if they're working from home. So this is just bringing up new issues that really need to be considered. Face-to-face contact within offices is something that's probably going to be less and less over the years. And there's going to be many companies that are actually looking to do away completely with the full-time office and actually use the rent spaces within these number of companies now that are out there that actually allow you to rent a desk or rent an office. And these present a whole new set of problems for the security of individuals, the risk assessment of people's workplaces, but also the information and the people. How do you know who's sitting next to you when you work in a particular office? So these are all new threats, I think, new threats that we're going to have to face. And I think the insider threat is something that's just just going to be right there in your face over the next year or two. And I think all businesses need to reassess and re-risk, if you like, people working from the home and how that works. And just the other subject that I'm going to bring up, just if you're not upset enough as to some of the issues that we face, let me talk about my specialism, terrorism, for a little bit. And what we know are people are radicalized nowadays, generally on the internet. It starts on the internet and it's built up like that. The vast majority of referees to the counter-terrorism units of people that are causing concern come from teachers and they come from religious people, etc. That they get to know, these people get to know and start talking about their problems. Doctors, teachers, and often religious clerics are the people that have been informing the police about the issues, as well as family members. And what we've had now, of course, is 3 months of people stacked inside their bedroom, looking at things on the internet. Kids who perhaps were not particularly radicalised beforehand they've been easy meat, effectively, for people that want to turn them into terrorists. And I think this is another issue that I think we're going to have to face, and it won't come in the next week or so. This is something that's going to come out over the next 6 months to a year as people become more radicalised, as they go back to the places that they've seen, and they are clearly showing signs of being radicalised. So I think you within your company, you within your life, if you come across these people, then obviously you've got to know what to do with them. And this is another issue for businesses, I think, that we need to face in the coming weeks and months ahead. So really, that's kind of where I'm going to finish up here. It's not a presentation to cheer you up. It's a presentation that's going to try and open up some conversations, I think, so that you can start looking at your own risk and where you need to confront these problems that I've faced, that I've brought up. And that's it, Lee. I've finished.
You still got time. It's like it's a knockout.
You scored 5 and 4. That thing could slip down at any moment, so I think I'll stop there. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
No, absolutely. I know we spoke obviously prior to this, prepping for this event, and you've also spoken at the event we did in the Grant show with Joan Keevil and Ariane Chappelle. You also mentioned, a bit about the duty of care, which was my gag about, if anyone knows the story about the employee in France who was in a hotel out of work hours, but committed extramarital affairs, but had a heart attack. But if I'm right,
with a prostitute.
Sorry.
With a prostitute.
Well, yeah, I was keeping away from that. I was leaving that out of the story. But the fact that I think French law or French corporate law meant that he was still under the duty of care because he was away with work, and his wife was suing the company for negligence or something like that.
She said I think the issue is you've got people at the moment that are, you've usually got people traveling around the world. You've got hotels that potentially aren't safe that you're sending to. Have you done any kind of checks on those? But also this bleisure. I mean, you may have heard of the bleisure piece, where a person will go on holiday, go to work, maybe use Paris as the example, go to Paris on a work trip, and then take his family out, and then on the Saturday and Sunday stay out there with his family. Where does your responsibility start and end with that? Are you responsible for the wife and the children as well? Are you responsible just for the person but you've booked the flight back for them on the Sunday? So all these things just have to be rethought and at least considered by your risk people as to whether you're happy to accept that risk.
Brilliant. And there's quite a few questions coming in now. I'm trying to manage them all. Where is it? Somebody, I think David sent a question about whistleblowing, but I think we'll come on to that in the next section, so that's fine. So just that piece that we're just talking on then. So because it's the working from home, it came from a question from Mark, actually. How much duty of care have you got when they're working at home at this current state, right? In terms if they're working from 9 till 5 or?
Well, you're certainly, if they're working for you from the time that they start work. The interesting piece that I can tell you that I got from a lawyer was actually that if you're sending someone, if someone's coming into your office on a daily basis, your responsibility for them starts the moment they step in the office. However, if you're sending them to a work trip, maybe to a conference, The moment they step outside their front door, they're your responsibility to the moment they get back. Now that of course can include overnights, that can include an airport, that can include an airport or an aviation, maybe that they get COVID. Where does your responsibility start and end there? And I think what needs to happen within your businesses is to review it, to find some understanding within your own lawyers as to what your stance is, and whether you actually do a risk assessment at all. And let me tell you, one of the pieces of work I have been doing is with the hotel industry, and it's quite scary how insecure many hotels are. And the more you go, and it doesn't matter whether it's a 5-star hotel or a 3-star hotel as to the level of security being attained on that hotel. You know, if you care to look, there are reports in the paper. One hotel in South Korea which had cameras in every room and every bathroom, and people were paying on the market to view whichever room they wanted to view, and that's not a one-off either. That's been happening certainly in other hotels that they've caught them, and a number of Airbnbs as well that have had cameras in the bedrooms and things.
No, exactly, and I think that's a really good point to raise. And well, you know, we spoke about Joan, and Joan's got a question. So again, bear with me. I'll see if I can get Joan in very quickly, because we are at 0 on the barometer. So Joan, if you're listening, hopefully you are. I'm going to send you a webcam request, and I believe you've got a question about home equipment, which impacts HR mainly, but also impacts the the health of your staff. You have got a request, Joan. Hopefully, there you are. Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you again. Good to see you again.
Yeah, I'm quite worried about what is known as display screen equipment, i.e. people set up at home, because I see so many photographs of people, when services are being advertised and they've got photos of people on laptops. And according to what I learned when I was developing DSE training, you weren't ever supposed to use a laptop for more than half an hour or maybe an hour at a time, because you can never get the perfect setup. Does an organisation have a duty of care to follow that up? Because obviously at the moment they can't do assessments for DSE at home. What's your suggestion? How are people coping?
Well, no, I definitely think that's an issue. And if you go into any cafe, you'll see people with their laptops on their legs, looking down at it, in everything that you would say is wrong about how you set an office up. So it's one of those other issues, I think, that companies are going to have to get their heads around, as to the first person that goes down with a bad back working on a laptop from a cafe is going to cause all sorts of issues for that company, I think. And you're absolutely right. And there's so many of these things that need to be considered. Do you put it in the contract that this is not your responsibility? People need to give them some information as to what they should be doing, and if they choose not to do that, then that's a matter for them, because you can't oversee it all the time, of course.
I think information, to my mind, would be the very first step, where you say to people, ideally get yourself a monitor and try and get an adjustable chair and a proper desk or table. I mean, at the very least, they need to be aware of the risks. But I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there, I think, if people. Yeah.
I think the other thing I didn't mention as well, which that does come to the fore, is people
but I've got some breaking news. But we've got to move on.
Yeah.
I can talk about Zoom.
What about in violent households? People are working from home and they've got a violent husband, or they're in the middle of a divorce. These things are real life, and this is things that companies need to think through.
Well, we can pick that up, and in the panel session, actually, Joan, we can always bring you back in. Obviously, Chris, we can expand on that element, which is quite pertinent at this minute in time, because there's a lot of stories out there about home abuse at the minute and harassment at home. And I know Sean, who I'm just about to introduce, is from an ethics and compliance side of SAI on the learning side, and has a lot to do about, I think he's going to be talking about harassment. So it's a nice segue. So thank you very much, Chris. That was brilliant, as always. And I'll see you on the panel very soon. Our third speaker for this evening is Sean Freidlin, who is the Director of Ethics and Compliance Learning for SAI Global. He resides in the United States, and it's a lunch club over there. But he focuses on helping organizations build successful ethics and compliance programs, has also been published by the SCCE blog and Corporate Compliance Insights. and has appeared on the Innovation in Compliance podcast with Tom Fox. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Sean.
Thank you, Lee. I really appreciate it. Greetings from New York City. Thank you all for taking some time out of your day to hang out, and honored to be part of this new club. It's my first time. Hopefully when travel is allowed again, I could head over to the UK. I'll be joining in person. So I come to this, with the intention of spending the next 15 minutes really talking about the new risks that working from home is bringing to an ethics and compliance program. Obviously, some of those have been discussed a little bit already by Stelios and Chris. Them and their peers are incredibly busy dealing with, data privacy and some of those other really specific use cases that have now become widespread problems for organizations who are adapting really quickly to the fact that thousands of people are working remote in environments that were not designed for an office or were not designed with the kind of IT infrastructure in place to protect corporate assets and corporate data. But that's not really the full scope of everything that a risk and compliance program needs to think about. It's not the full scope of the responsibilities that will fall on an ethics and compliance training program to mitigate amongst an employee workforce. And really what I wanted to focus on in the time that I have is the regulatory risks and the cultural risks. I think there's two separate buckets. And then there's also a third bucket, more specific to the ethics and compliance profession as a whole, the responsibilities of those professionals, not necessarily the risks that they're training on, but really their growth within an organization's C-suite or seat at the table, and that's really progress risk. So we'll talk about all of that. I have a lot of data to share. I would love to maybe launch the poll that I shared with Lee so we can get some insight as to what the people on the line are doing in regards to some data that I've collected in advance of this.
Want me to do that now? Yeah?
Yeah, great.
Okay, launching. 3, 2, 1.
All right. So how has remote work and COVID-19 changed your organization's approach to ethics and compliance training? If you own ethics and compliance training responsibilities within that organization, obviously this question is designed for you. If you don't, but you take training, then maybe you could share the perspective of that in terms of whether or not you've seen more training and communications coming from your ethics and compliance or HR team or L&D team, depending on how your organization is really structured. But would love to kind of see how the 50 or so people on the line are really dealing with training in response to COVID and work from home.
I'm just waiting for a few more people to answer. We've got about 50% now. Give them a few seconds. It's reasonably spread across 3 anyway. So 3, if you can hear my voice, please vote now. 3, 2, 1. I'm closing it. So I'm going to hit the share button this time, which I didn't on the first. Can you see that, Sean?
Yeah, perfect. So 43%, the majority of people haven't changed their training plans. Nobody's delivering less training. 36% are delivering more training, and around 20% are delivering the same training, but focusing on different risks. So we've collected data on this question from around 500 ethics and compliance professionals over the past month in webinars that we've hosted internally, and then also with our colleagues at Ethisphere. And I want to share some of that data to really frame the conversation that we're going to have, because the answer to this question, and really any ethics and compliance program and the risk profile of any organization, is always going to be unique to the industry that you operate in and your own organization and your risk appetite. But there are some general, I think, philosophies or ideas that you can embrace from today that'll hopefully help you frame the way you make decisions around these risks and around your training decisions moving forward as we're kind of heading into month 3 or month 4 of COVID-19 and remote work. So how has COVID-19 most directly impacted your ethics and compliance program? The majority of people, almost 50% of respondents in our previous webinars, have said that they're adjusting their training plans, frequency, and risk areas, but not necessarily delivering more or less training. They're really just reframing the risks that they are training on. The number one risk that they are focused on right now is data privacy. I think that, if you listen to Stelios, there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about that. I'm using my personal iPad to read a work document that I use to prepare for this meeting, and I'm on my work laptop. So certainly, I think that anytime you have people working from home, there is going to be a lot of data privacy risks that we'll talk about a little bit more. And then the minority of people are really using this time to re-examine their corporate values, policies, and purpose, or adjusting their long-term strategy. And a lot of people are struggling to effectively collaborate and do their jobs. The other thing that we were really curious about, and this is really about progress risk, I think, if I had to frame the context of this question, is whether or not organizations are really slowing down or speeding up compared to how they would normally act in the cadence of their ethics and compliance program normally, now that people are working from home and in this environment. And it was really a 50-50 split. So some people are speeding up and doing more and really leaning on the role of ethics and compliance in an organization to build that culture, to keep that consistent drumbeat of you have to do the right thing, you have to comply with the rules even though you're from home. And 48% of people were stepping back to respect the moment and doing less, which is understandable. You know, there's obviously a lot of pressures that play into the communications or the decisions that are happening throughout an organization right now. But I do think that there is a risk that we'll talk about in the next 10 minutes of stepping back and really maybe losing some of the progress you've built up over the past few years or months to really establish the role of your ethics and compliance program and the voice you have as a compliance team within your organization's culture and leadership. And then the final thing that I really want to talk about, I think it really relates to code of conduct and the culture of an organization, is whether or not you feel like the pandemic has made your professional relationships and workplace culture stronger or weaker. And 58% of people feel like what's happening right now is making the organization stronger and bringing people together, even though they're physically apart, which is really refreshing. And I think, certainly indicative of how things are going here from my perspective. So that's a lot. So let's step back and really break down these three categories of risk and what they mean. I think I have 10 minutes left, and I think I'll be able to cover all of it. So from a regulatory risk perspective, the one question that we've gotten, we use GoToWebinar also, and one question that we've gotten a lot is, how will what's happening today impact the way regulators view our compliance program? Will they be more lenient? Will they have higher expectations? Will they give us more flexibility? And the truth is, there isn't really a concrete answer. Obviously, there are a lot of different regulatory agencies that govern the overall compliance landscape as well as specific industries. And I think it's dangerous to assume that there will be leniency or flexibility. And I think that what compliance programs really need to do is not compromise the integrity of their program to meet the challenges of the moment. I think that now more than ever, there are all these buzzwords being thrown around, the new normal, right? Business is unusual. These are things that we've heard a million times. But the fact is that there is still business as usual happening despite the business as unusual, right? You might have new risks as a result of working from home, but a lot of the existing risks that you were spending so much time and resources and effort to mitigate still exist. Coronavirus is a really serious problem, but it's also potentially a distraction from the fact that these other things do exist. So what are some of those risks? Bribery and corruption is always a top 5 risk area for any organization across any industry. Coronavirus increases the challenges of bribery and corruption and fraud, and these really finance, monetary driven risks, right? People feel pressure to perform. Budgets are freezing in organizations, but salespeople still have quotas they need to meet. And they need to meet those quotas and keep their jobs despite all of these other factors that are happening. They still need to sell what they're selling in order to provide for their families. And it's possible that their wife or their significant other might have lost their job, so they feel even more pressure during COVID-19 to hit their quotas and keep their job or get that bonus. And there's also less oversight because they're home and they're not working in the office. Maybe they're taking that meeting on their cell phone instead of their business line, or maybe they're using their personal Gmail account instead of their work Gmail account or their work email account to answer that email. So I really feel like bribery and corruption is probably one of the most elevated risks in the world right now, because people feel pressure to close those deals, and they might break the rules or compromise their integrity or values to do it, to hit those numbers, because they feel like there's less oversight and they can get away with it. And there was actually an article in the Wall Street Journal, something, as a New Yorker I read all the time, that really corroborates that fact. I'll read a brief excerpt from it. Layoffs and furloughs in compliance departments have arrived in sectors hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic, according to consultants, researchers, and compliance officers. Companies less affected by the downturn are trimming compliance-related expenses or making preparations for possible budget cuts. Some are choosing not to fill open positions or delaying planned investments in technology. The risk of misappropriated assets or fudged financials can increase as a result. Anti-corruption organizations have warned that the economic upheaval caused by the pandemic can create an environment that's ripe for bribery. All of these factors are creating the perfect storm for fraud risk, says Andy McNeil, the Director of Research at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So think about all these factors. Teams are getting shredded or shrunk or consolidated. Budgets are being, paused. Investments in technology are being paused, but the risk still exists. So when we think about that progress risk, all of the work that you've put in to build a strong anti-corruption, anti-bribery program to date to prevent fraud, if you slow down, if you step back, if you pause, if you think that this is an excuse to not do that work, you're really exposing your organization to even more risk. And I think that's something that people need to consider, the cost of inaction, the cost of, pausing the program. Of course, you need to be respectful of the moment, and you need to maybe reframe some of the messaging and positioning to be more empathetic, to be more respectful of what's happening around the world, because bribery and corruption might not be the highest priority for a lot of people right now, but the risk still exists and the consequences still exist. And whether or not those become a factor, 3 months from now or 6 months from now or a year from now, it's really dangerous to really focus solely on the short-term response to the pandemic, which is obviously important, and then lose sight of the long-term consequences as well as the progress that you've been building towards over the past 1 or 2 or 3 years as a compliance program. Every compliance program is really thinking about changing behavior in the long term, and you can't let this change that. So let's quickly buzz through some more risks, right? Because I got 5 more minutes left on the meter.
And I've got some good questions for you as well, so it's all good.
Data privacy, cybersecurity, information security. Stelios, I think, did a great job relaying all that, why it's really challenging, whether you're on guest Wi-Fi, whether you're using your personal devices. Obviously, there's been a lot of articles written about a slew of new phishing attacks. People are using the COVID-19 pandemic to reframe the way they target their phishing to attack the vulnerabilities of people's empathy and sympathy to the pandemic and take advantage of that for their own personal gains. You really need to be conscious of that. Ethics and compliance programs really need to focus on data privacy, training, awareness, relaying those best practices, and then reframing some of them from a work from home context. Competition, intellectual property, and conflicts of interest. Super important. What if your wife works for a competitor? What if your roommate works for a competitor? How do you protect that intellectual property or prevent those conflicts of interest from taking place when you're working from home and you might be in the next room? If you're an organization that relies on events for revenue and suddenly you can't host physical events, do you change your business model in a way that might conflict with some of your existing values to try to preserve that business? These are things that are really happening right now around the world. We've seen them firsthand at SAI Global. And then exports and trade compliance, obviously a highly regulated area. But coronavirus has, dismantled supply chains and really changed a lot of important export behavior and global, diplomacy around that. So how do you manage your supply chains in a way that still complies with trade compliance best practices is something that a lot of, I would imagine pharma and medical device organizations are thinking about a lot. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, when we talk about cultural risks, the biggest thing right now that I think employees are really expecting from their senior leadership, I can imagine a lot of senior leadership, C-suite type people are in this meeting right now. So the way that employees are looking at you right now is, are you acting in a way that is aligned with the values and beliefs of the company? And are you prioritizing purpose over profits? Or are you really trying to focus on the bottom line and maybe compromising some of those values for the sake of preserving people's jobs, right? There's no right answer. There's a really tough dilemma that a lot of organizations face. But the decisions that you make today that affect your culture are going to have an impact on your culture for months or years to come, right? People will remember 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic for a lot of reasons, but internally in organizations, how senior leaders and how managers really, the people that you interact with directly on a weekly and monthly basis are, those decisions are going to have a long-term effect. So culture risk, harassment. How do you behave on a Zoom call, on video conferences that you're now hosting every day? Is your bar lower for some of the things that you would never think to say to someone face to face when they're next to you at the desk when you're going to see them every day? But now that you know that you're not really going to see them for another few months, are you going to make that joke? Do you feel more confident typing something at your keyboard than you would say in person? sexual harassment virtually is still sexual harassment. Making someone feel uncomfortable, whether you say something or show them something or send them a joke, digitally is still a really powerful thing that a lot of people have to deal with. We have a sexual harassment expert that really has written a really good blog post on our website about how virtual harassment, virtual bullying, abuse at home, these are all challenges that organizations have to deal with and adapt their harassment training to be cognizant of, because virtual harassment is still a powerful thing. And then social media risk, right? All these employees that are now home all the time are by nature going to spend more time on social media than they might be at the office. And if, in New York, there was a story that happened on Monday about a woman who did something pretty bad in Central Park. I'm not going to get into the logistics of it, but it was recorded. What she did was recorded and went viral, and her organization was forced to respond. And they were essentially pressured by the social media reaction to this behavior to fire that employee. So there are a lot of direct and indirect social media risks that are naturally going to be more present in this moment. So those are really, we've spent hours talking about this in the past month around the cultural and regulatory risks around working from home. So a lot to cover in 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to pause there because I hit 0, but open to questions.
I have, hopefully Nita's there. So,
yeah, I am.
Nita, am I going to pronounce this right? Medev.
Neta Medav, yes, almost there.
Neta Medav, CEO and co-founder of Vault Rooms, and she's got a question for you, Sean.
Absolutely.
Hi, Sean. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. I enjoyed your talk. I would like to ask you about misconduct reporting. You mentioned the increased risk that you see for virtual bullying. We call it workplace cyberbullying in our worlds, and we're definitely seeing an increase of that. At the same time, we're seeing more employees feeling fearful of coming forward and reporting harassment or bullying or any type of misconduct, fraud, and corruption as well when it happens to them, because there's job insecurity involved now. But outside this, microclimate of coronavirus, what we know is that majority of employees do not report. 75% of misconduct that is observed is not reported internally. And the biggest hotline provider in the world, by their own admission, say that only 10 or 11% of all reporting that takes place through the hotline or the associated web forms. What will it take to make employees report more and trust more and blow the whistle when they observe or experience misconduct of any form of kind?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I personally think about a lot. I'm very kind of interested in that research. I know the research you're referring to. I'm familiar with that company. I think there's 2 key words that really come into play here. You touched on one of them. They're trust and technology, right? So from a trust perspective, the company needs to, and whether this is the top or the middle, whether it's your direct manager or whether it's the senior leadership, they need to convey that there won't be retaliation if you speak up, right? And they need to demonstrate and champion people that do speak up and report misconduct so that other people feel confident knowing that when they do speak up, or if they see something wrong, they can report it to their manager, to the senior leadership, to the compliance team, through the hotline, whatever medium they choose to use. They need to feel like they won't be retaliated against, like they won't lose their job. And that tone is set at the top. And it's really hard to manage that, because I think a lot of the times you might feel confident to speak up in your own organization, but there might be a tone set even higher than your boss who is retaliating against people for speaking up. And that's certainly something we're seeing in the news today.
Breaking news, Sean. We have to cut it short. Thank you very much, Nita, for your question. We want to get to the panel and breaking news about the new Specsavers opening in Barnard Castle. You can read that.
Castle is lovely.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly. So we've got Chris Phillips back in the room, Stelios back in the room, and also our special guest star, Alan Barr. I'll see if I can make him a panelist and activate his camera as well.
Okay, good evening everybody. I'm Alan Barr, as Lee said. I'm from the Institute of Operational Risk, which people may know has recently joined with the Institute of Risk Management. I'm from the Scottish chapter of that, and in addition to that, I've got sort of over 30 years experience working in various financial services companies in a variety of risk roles. So I'm going to leave the time for questions.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And Terry, quick intro from you.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Nice to see everybody again. Sean, Lee, everybody. My name is Terry Lee. I'm the former head of resilience and BCM for SAI Global, and I've been a practitioner and espousing the virtues of operational resilience around the world for about 4 years now within the software vendor community. Lee and I and Sean worked together previously. It's great to be included. And Lee, your suit is just so snappy.
Oh, thank you. It's an old one. It's an old one. But thank you very much. And I don't want to stretch out the time too much like we did last time. We've been having some issues with the cameras because we've got so many of us on screen. Maybe bringing people in might be a bit of a challenge. But I know Andrew McIntyre had a question, and it might be a good one to start for Alan maybe, which is, you know, we're talking about security in Zoom and the various other things. But what he's noticing is more and more children are joining calls and parents in the background. So there's a new risk of, you know, the home and the office merging. You know, and when me and Nita met a few days ago, her daughter was in the room as well, which is not a problem at all. But is that opening up any any risks for companies or any? I think actually, Sean, we spoke about this as well in terms of conflicts of interest. So just wondering, Alan, from your side, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's opening up a huge risk, and I thought it was really interesting that Stelios talked a lot about, you know, people working in, you know, cafes, etc. And I think that's one that organisations are quite, you know, not mature, but have at least considered in the past. But I think, you know, the risk of, you know, talking of Zoom in particular, you know, we're seeing people using their personal Zoom accounts to escape the sort of standard time limit in order to do work calls. You know, people using the chat functionality and that, then saving that down, etc. But I think the real one about when people are in the office, or at least in a sort of slightly safer environment, you can at least guarantee that you've got over 50% of their attention. But I think if somebody's doing it while trying to manage 2 or 3 young toddlers, there's absolutely, you know, it's less than 20%, and it's just, you know, I think it's just trying to manage that and actually getting the message out to colleagues that at time it may actually be best to say, rather than making yourself available all the time, specify set hours where you can work in a safe environment. Because my final comment on it would be, it's the accidental thing, is that you're working on a document and a toddler just drops something in your PC, and before you know it, a draft or a confidential document is sent by, you know, predictive email fill to a whole series of external contacts, etc., completely accidentally. But once it's gone, it's gone. So yeah, a whole new raft of risks. But I certainly, my recent experiences, I don't think organisations have actually faced into how to manage that, because they've been so busy trying to make sure people can actually work from home.
Brilliant. That's a great answer. And in terms of, you know, anyone to follow up that, we have got more questions, but does anyone want to jump in there on that topic?
Well, Lee, it was always a big issue. People on trains actually having conversations have been overheard. One of the big, I always remember coming across this myself with someone with their computer on in the train, and they were having a conversation on the phone, and everyone in the carriage could hear exactly what they were saying. So this is just multiplying that issue, particularly when they go into cafes or they go into what are effectively insecure locations to have phone calls and use the computers.
Maybe things are different over in Europe right now, but I know in New York, you know, even if a cafe is open, not many are, it's strictly for takeaway, right? Nobody is really sitting inside right now and using those Wi-Fi networks. So are these kind of risks to anticipate for the future when things reopen, or is this something that might be a little bit different in Europe for you guys?
That's a very good point. I think, Stelios, did you have a point on that? I like it. If you can put your finger up, that's brilliant. It's like at school. But yeah, Stelios, got a point.
Actually, I totally agree with Sean. For sure, this is a risk that maybe it's not so much evident now, because Nobody can sit in a hall of a cafe, but definitely it's going to start happening more and more as the cafes will start accepting customers. And yeah, I will admit it, because I don't think, well, it's good that we make my own criticism. Before COVID, I have attended a conference call. Fortunately, there was no confidential information shared, but I have attended the call from a coffee shop, and actually people could hear me when I was talking about several things. And definitely, it is something which happens, and we have to control it. And the way that we control it, at least in SaarGummi, is that we are giving guidelines as regards to how they should be, how each meeting should be treated, and especially we have policies that govern confidential meetings. So, for example, there is a guideline that says that if you enter into a meeting that has been classified as confidential, you must always use a headset, so that what other people are saying to you, at least, is not being heard by people who shouldn't hear it. And this is maybe one way to basically control this kind of risk.
No, absolutely. No. And just another question is quickly coming actually from Alison Wheatley. And this probably more towards Terry actually on this point initially, and then we can open it out. But after Fukushima in Japan, certification to the ISO standards, especially 27001, became much more important to all companies to provide assurance to customers and suppliers. Should the current global situation not turn company attention to these global assurances for future robustness and agility?
So it's an interesting question. I think the shift that's taking place in the practitioner community and within these companies is away from BCM and to the topic of resilience. People are starting to really question, well, what does it mean to be resilient? And if you look at the material from the Bank of England, for example, on operational resilience and what came out of the SCA, you can take a lot of what they have produced and cross-reference it to ISO 22301, through some of the Federal Reserve publications going back 17 years after 9/11 and banking resilience. And I think that drove what happened at 9/11 here in the US, drove a lot of continuity and resilience certifications and conversations. And I think the same thing is happening or will happen again. But as it pertains to resilience, there isn't a standard for resilience. There isn't a real solid set of metrics. So it will be a combination of factors, the 223XX series, including the one on crisis management that my colleague James Green was talking about a couple of weeks ago, 22320, which is about emergency management and crisis communications. I think that will definitely be an area of driving interest in the market.
All right, thank you very much for answering that. And I'm just going to tag something on the end of that Philip Martin sent in actually, because it's around the regulation side. It might be Alan, it might be Sean, it might be Chris, Stelios. You might want to chirp, I was going to say chirp, chirp in the nicest sense. But regulators would give no leeway at this time. On the contrary, they will ensure that they are not found wanting in their supervision. You know, learning lessons from 2008. So it might be one for Alan, it might be one for Sean, but in terms of, you know, supervision at this minute in time is obviously going to be a challenge for companies, but, you know, the regulators are going to be wanting it more, right? Alan, would you like to answer that?
Just one comment on that. As far as I know, nobody in the regulatory community has relaxed compliance requirements. Nobody has said, oh, your cyber security regulatory requirements, yeah, we're just going to waive those for the next 9 months. So I think it's a valid point. And if anything, I think the legal profession is going to skyrocket towards the end of the pandemic as lawsuits start to fly about what happened with data privacy and discrimination during the pandemic. Yeah.
That was the old privacy then. But
yeah.
Alan,
yeah, in terms of the regulator oversight, regulatory burden, certainly what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing from colleagues in other organisations is that is dramatically increasing. The nature of the interaction has changed. Obviously, there's a lot more use of Zoom, calls, etc. But what has also increased is the request for information over a very short period. How you're responding to this, how you're responding to that, and setting out a set of scenarios. And certainly I do not see that stopping anytime soon, and it's going to cover all aspects, right through from financial stability through to protecting customer outcomes, through to data privacy, etc. So yeah, definitely increasing.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to come in on there, or would you like me to flip it to another question? You all got on that? Well, this one might, again, it tags on to what we said before. It's about the working from home on the screen, but it's, there's a personal security risk, if potentially your children or your possessions are in the background. You had Dele Alli obviously get broken into, a footballer in the UK, at gunpoint, had his watches stolen. Not saying he was zooming before it, but he may have been, right? Like Chris has got a white wall, and this is Andrew McIntyre again's comment. But you can see Terry's front room, you can see my loft, and you can see a little bit of Sean's, and a tiny bit of Stelios. Since he shut the door before, you've got his music room behind that door, and I will have him playing the drums live on an episode in the future. But in terms of that respect, there's a bit of a personal security risk there. Is there anything, Chris, you might want to come on that one?
I was just going to say it is interesting because you've got to bear in mind that it's been quite difficult for criminals the last 3 months, particularly physical security, if you like, because people have been at home. But actually, this will encourage people to do different things and look at different crimes and things like actually taking people hostage. I mean, I know it sounds quite extreme, but actually, if they know you're in your home address, they know what you do. These options are there, and it's silly to think that criminals won't make use of them. The thing with Dele Alli, the footballer, I mean, you'll remember that a couple of years ago, some Liverpool footballers were all burgled when they were being filmed playing in another country, in Turkey, I think. So criminals will use these times to commit crime, and we've all got to consider that.
That's great, thank you. Sean, have you got anything on that? Don't worry, you don't have to come in.
Nothing that we haven't covered already, I don't think. No, I think Chris got it down pretty pat.
Perfect. Okay, I'm just seeing if there's quite a few here actually, and I'm just trying to see who is next on the list. What have we got here? Thomas Kroll, who joined us on episode 1 actually as a special guest on the panel, like Terry and Ellen. He's saying he had a discussion today about work from home enabling companies to recruit from anywhere, not just the local labour force. So that obviously opens up opportunity, but also negative points as well. So the discussion led on to companies being able to potentially pay less. You've got that Fiverr website where you can pay £5 and get websites built and all that kind of stuff. But he said you're going to pay less for people living in rural areas and other countries. This sounds good for companies, but does it introduce more, inequality within the workplace and create more risks and more issues? So who would like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was hired by SAI Global, the company was based out of Australia, and the closest office to me was in Boston. I would have never gotten that job had they not hired remote workers. And I think that, typically the argument for remote work is that it attracts the best talent. Now, what happened now in this pandemic has obviously escalated the adoption of remote work drastically to the point where now Twitter is saying that all employees could work from home in perpetuity, and Google, Facebook, Salesforce, some of the biggest companies in the world are saying you can work from home for the rest of the year. Google today announced if you work from home, you can have a $1,000 budget to buy furniture. I mean, maybe I'm naive, or maybe I'm just an optimist. I would like to think that work from home will result in companies seeking out and attracting and hiring better talent that fit the roles of the jobs that they're trying to hire, and that they will not outsource that talent or resort to cheaper labor internationally that will deprive the jobs of people that would normally be competing for that role. I think if they do opt to do that, if they do, what the question is assuming, look for cheaper labor to hire and outsource and replace these jobs with more easy to, more affordable remote options, it says a lot about their values and culture. And I think it will ultimately reflect poorly on them from the perspective of customers and shareholders.
Great point. And I think Stelios, you raised the finger on that one. We've got.
But also, Chris raised his hand before me, so I'm happy to let him first say what he wants.
Thanks, Stelios. Just a very quick one. I'll refer you back to my insider threat issue. Human resources are a key to making sure you've got a secure workforce. And I do fear that outsourcing basically loses a great deal of that. And you are opening yourself up if you don't do the checks, the pre-employment checks, the security culture piece, and also people when they leave the organization having their access taken away.
There's a whole new world of third-party risk that comes into play if you do that.
So if I may also add a couple of cents. I think that definitely there is value in what I call the nomadic workforce. Basically, being able to have be able to hire people, talents that really suit your needs from anywhere they can become available in the world. Of course, this means that there is definitely a loss of, let's say, connection between the people and the business process. So eventually, if you just hire people who just spend their time working for a company, but they don't mix with the people and you don't understand the culture of the company, you are definitely facing risks as regards to your business processes, especially if they are not designed to be run remotely. So there is value there. I definitely see there is a future in this concept of the nomadic workforce, but this definitely requires a re-engineering of the business processes so that they can be run in a secure way. And if I could also crash a little bit of your point, because you said that you had this opportunity in Boston, etc. I also had this opportunity in Germany. I was in Greece, and then I decided to move to Germany. I didn't do it from Greece.
I prefer Greece over Germany, personally.
Right,
yes,
we're actually bang on time. I've just sent a chat message out saying hopefully everyone can just hold on for 5 minutes. I think we've just got another question or two, and then we can wrap up. But there was a good point made here about, and it tends to, the conversation we had as a pre-speaker call a few weeks ago was around the online training. So obviously Sean with the ethics and compliance training, but as a group, just in terms of training your employees or onboarding, most people are get rid of people, but onboarding and training or training at home, compliance, being an ex-PwC guy, I used to do online compliance reports all the time and making sure I didn't have any shares in the companies that we were auditing, and they didn't pay me enough for me to have any shares, to be honest, but so it was a pointless exercise. But is there anything you guys can mention on that, about the training modules, completing that, and then keeping tags on your employees, following your key controls? Alan? Then sure. Oh, Alan, 1 second, mate. 1 second. That's completely my fault. You're back.
Hi, yeah, I think it's even more vital, and certainly from a financial services perspective, it's something that's been, it's quite embedded in organisations. And I think it's not only the fact that people have to complete these online modules, but it's the training and follow-up where people do not complete it, and that there's actually some consequences for not completing it, rather than just, oh, it's unfortunate. I think there has got to be in performance, reward, somehow. And I think the other thing, in the current environment, in addition to that, the mandatory stuff that you do online, supplement it by still delivering the training sessions, but use Zoom. And as you do them, do what you've done in this thing week. Make sure there's opportunity for people to interact, make sure that they're commenting in the chat, etc., so that you can actually check that they're engaged in the training, they're actually taking some level of understanding, rather than they've just dialed in to claim an attendance point.
No, that's a great point. I've been guilty in the past of listening in to long calls by companies where you just put the sound on and you've got your feet up.
Yeah.
And you're doing something else, right? So Sean, I think you had something to add as well.
Yeah, I think there's two factors here, right? So a lot of organizations, manufacturing, companies that have factories that are typically doing face-to-face training. There's obviously a challenge for them to adopt that face-to-face training to a virtual environment, where even if you're doing it on a virtual meeting like this, hopefully the more secure program like GoToWebinar or something with better data privacy settings than Zoom, it's still not the same as if you're delivering it face-to-face. So you really need to think about how you adapt that typical face-to-face training for a virtual environment, because it's not just copy and paste, do the same thing. Now, in terms of online training, compliance and HR are typically laggards in terms of adopting technology trends, but it's safe to say that the majority of technology being used by compliance programs today have the tracking capability, the reporting capability to demonstrate what people started, what people finished, if they didn't finish, and remind them to report them, and have some pretty robust analytics there. The other best practice that I would say that companies should think about in this remote setting is to really enable mobile training. If you don't already have kind of mobile training as a default in terms of your program, enable someone to use their phone or their iPad to take that training as opposed to just doing it on their computer.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I think Stelios has got something to add on that one, and then I've got some questions too related.
Quick one, like 10, like only 10 seconds. So I remember some years ago, I was working for a multinational company, nothing to do with my current employer. I have to put that disclaimer. And I remember that there was an IT administrator who was actually passing the right answers to the people so that they can quickly pass the test of the online training. And that is why today what we do is that we proactively, for example, attack our own employees. We try to phish them so that they remain on alert regarding the actual phishing attack that they might get from the bad guy. So yes, they may share the SOS answers between them, but in the end of the day, we will attack them and they will fall. So then they will learn.
No, that's a great point. And just to say that I was watching, I'm a Catherine Bigelow fan. My favorite movie is Point Break. Just going to get that out there quickly. But I was watching K-19 Widowmaker last night, actually. And obviously that was about the nuclear submarine that started leaking and all that kind of stuff and the risks around that. But they were doing drills all the way through their first voyage. So, that is what, I like the idea of phishing, and I don't think companies do it enough. And when they do, I don't think they run it well. I know, Chris, you do a lot of physical penetration testing, which sounds quite dodgy, but it isn't. And
I've never failed to get in, Lee. That's the annoying thing.
Yeah, but what is it, tailgating?
It might look quite obvious,
Yeah, because you mentioned about the tailgating, which obviously the next two questions, the reason why I mention it is to do with people getting rid of physical offices and how that'll impact. Though obviously tailgating will be less of an issue then, but you still have your data center issues, where the cloud is, whatever. So that's one question. I'm going to tag this one to it. So the other one is more to do with, I think Harpreet's mentioned the MOD are giving screens to all their staff. And then Gareth Evans has mentioned that Google are offering $3,000 per employee to buy the equipment. And Harpreet's saying a lot of people struggle to store it. Some people haven't got the room for that kind of equipment. And, there's also back to the equality divide in terms of, whether you can afford it if you have to buy it yourself. There's two things there. One is removal of workplaces, and the other one is, the inequality or giving them stuff that they can't house. So who would like to come in on those two?
I'll just mention something on I think I did mention it earlier, but actually I think there'll be more of a movement to companies and individuals using joined workspaces. So there's a number of companies now, I know it's certainly across London, I'm sure across the world, where you just go in and you get an individual space. Well, that is completely insecure from a perspective that you can overhear exactly what's being said at all times. So if you want to, you could, as an example, from a criminal's perspective, you find someone that's working for a particular company and you just hire the workspace next to them and you can hear exactly what's going on. So these things are what criminals think of, and we've got to be aware of that.
And then just to quickly go in there, obviously WeWork and the equivalents are obviously all sweating at this minute in time because they'll be the first ones to go, in terms of contracts and that kind of thing. So has anyone got anything to mention, to add on to that, or anything to mention about the home working with the equipment or anything?
Well, I think the homework perspective, we're still in like the first inning of that happening. And it's interesting whether or not, if companies adopt that approach long term, if they find it to be the right step moving forward, will they reallocate some of their budget, some of their fiscal resources to give employees an allowance to buy the stuff that they might need to have a better work from home environment? We saw Google did it. Obviously, Google has unlimited resources, so they could swing that. It'll be interesting to see if other organizations kind of, here's $50, here's $100 a month, whatever, to do that.
Yeah,
cheaper than the real thing.
Yeah, I think the final point on it is it's back to the question that came up during, I think it was Stelios' presentation about the DSE assessments, etc. Companies will put controls in place. They'll give you $3,000 or whatever. You'll need to submit a receipt to prove that you actually bought, furniture, etc. for it. You bought a screen, etc. But what that's not going to pick up is, did you buy the right desk, the right seat, the right screen for you and for your home? And that's the type of things that are actually assessed when you're using them in the workplace. So I think there's going to be a huge rush for people saying, yeah, here, have some budget, you can spend up to X without authorization. And it'll be interesting to see when the first claim for the bad back is cropped up before it comes in. It might reverse that quite quickly.
No, absolutely. And we have hit 7:40, and I said we'd hit 7:30 and summarise. But I'm going to give one final question here. It's something that David Peller mentioned at 7 o'clock, so he's due an answer hopefully. But we were talking about the sales teams being under pressure to meet targets and therefore succumbing to ABC issues. However, isn't the main risk from senior board managers who are even more under pressure to meet targets and maintain that business survival? I know we spoke about the survival element, Sean, the other week, and Chris and Stelios. How do you deal with senior ABC risks? The final question, and then I'll let everyone go back to the sunshine. Stelios.
Okay. Good question. So I think that you have to be honest, and you have to explain specifically what is the risk, okay, and explain it in lay terms, because people, let's say people upstairs, they have other areas of expertise, and they are not supposed to fully understand, for example, how an IT risk is going to materialize and what will be the impact. So we, as CISOs or people who are responsible for the IT infrastructure, we must clearly state the risks. And I mentioned earlier when I was presenting that what we were forced to do with COVID was actually to introduce 2 new technologies at the same time. And that's not the normal way. Okay, so risks should be explained. So yes, you ask us, for example, to deploy right here, right now, let's say Microsoft 365, but nobody's going to properly use it. So there will be people who will lose information, and there will be cost for it. You have to be prepared. I told you, now you know. I think that's the only approach, to be honest.
Alan, what we'll do is we'll try and get all 3 of you, if you all want to speak, and then I'll summarise.
Yeah.
Alan.
Okay. Yep, in 30 seconds, I think, I agree with what Stelios has said, but there's 2 other things. One is oversight. Make your senior guys subject to the same level of oversight that you would do on the normal staff. And the other thing as well is, this is where you really need the role of your non-executives in your board, who actually have a legal responsibility to monitor what senior guys, chief executive, etc. are doing. You really need them to perform the role.
Fantastic, thank you. And then Chris or Sean on that one, and then anything to add?
I'll go first. So from my perspective, it's remembering the basics. Physical security, information security, and people security all have to be done properly. And if you don't do any one of those, then you've messed up. And it's reminding the board really that ideally you'd have one person in charge of all those areas, but that often is not the case. But it all comes down to cost. And return of investment on security is always a difficult one to show.
Thank you, Chris. And Sean, anything to add as a summary on anything?
I think pressure is a waterfall. If the C-suite or the board is putting pressure on the C-suite is going to put pressure on the directors. It's just going to scale down to the bottom of the organization, and you need to be aware of that. You're creating that pressure, whether inadvertently or inadvertently, and you need to really, think about the short-term benefits of hitting that quarterly number versus the long-term benefits of doing business conduct, right? It's really the heart of everything we talk about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. And, in terms of the COVID scale, the Boris barometer, we are probably down here somewhere. But I'd like to thank everyone for staying with us who's on the line, and everyone, had to drop due to me eating, well, ourselves eating into their family meal time. Hopefully you enjoyed your microwave meals and your drinks. I'd like to thank Alan for joining on the panel, and Terry, you had to drop. Obviously, I'd like to thank the esteemed speakers, Stelios, Chris and Sean. What we're going to do after this is put together Q&A responses from all the questions that came in. I'm still finalising the one from episode 1, but we'll get that out with the illustration and then hopefully with some copy that we'll send out with it. And then the video, which I'll agree with anyone that asks questions and the speakers that they're okay with putting that out there to, to review on a later date. And then any feedback, please send it over to me. I'm looking to keep this going in between the live events as a bridge, and then keep the global community with Sean and Terry from the States. And I know a few people joining us from the Middle East, which is late over there, so thank you very much. So please, everyone stay safe, and thank you to all the speakers and all of the attendees.